Hello, everyone. Welcome to Style to Impact Live. If you're joining me live, thank you very much for being here. If you're watching the replay, thank you very much for coming back and listening to today's conversation. Before I get into any of these conversations, I'd like to take a moment to pause and to reflect. I call it my wellness check in for us to reflect on how we're feeling and what is it we need right now to show up as our most authentic self and intentionally for ourselves. So if you're here live, let me know how you're doing. I hope your week is going great. If you're here watching the replay, thank you very much for coming back. And I also want to hear from you. If you're new to the space, I'm Salida Roberts. I'm the founder of Style to Impact. And I truly believe that representation is not just you being in the room or having a seat at the table, but it's also how you show up. I'm pretty excited for this conversation that I'm having today. I decided for the month of May, I wanted to have women join me in this space as we talk about the style stories, stories that we hold near and dear that affects the way that we show up in our business and our career, especially when it comes to our appearance and style. So today I have a wonderful guest who I'm going to bring to the stage. Oh my gosh, I'm like so excited to have
Hey.
Keirsten Greggs with me today. I was on Kirsten's podcast, LinkedIn Live Trap Chat, and we had such an amazing time that I thought something that she didn't realize when she said it was part of the inspiration behind what I'm doing today, which is talking about style stories. But before I get into the conversation, I want to introduce Kirsten a little bit because she is, and I love when we get these awards, one of the top HR influencers to watch in 2023. She's also the founder of Trap Recruiter with over 20 years of experience, and she's also a talent acquisition leader. Thank you very much for
Yes.
being here with me. So amazing to have you. Let
So
the people
happy to be
pour.
here.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Anything you want to share with us about yourself that I just briefly touched on your bio, but I know you are an amazing individual. Anything you want to share?
No, I think you covered the most important things, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, oh no. I try to do you as best as justice as possible that I can because I want to make sure that spotlight is on you and you're shining because we're getting a little bit vulnerable today. We're
Hmm.
tackling the things that where I call like internal or external stories that we hold or may have been told about how we show up and how we should show up in our professional careers, in our businesses. And I know you've had over 20 years of experience in HR and recruiting. And so you might have seen some things and you might have been told some things when
Absolutely.
entering that space. What are some things that you were told in terms of your appearance and how you should enter the
Mm.
space to be taken seriously?
Well, we have to keep in mind that the things that I brought with me
Yeah.
were because I have boomer parents. And I know that, and I'm not using that as a slur. I'm very appreciative of both of my parents already having been in what you would call a white collar or semi white collar jobs, because my father was a sales manager for Nabisco. So he didn't work in an office, but he actually had to wear a suit and a tie or a shirt and a tie when he went into supermarkets, even, to present products to and represent the company. And my mother was worked in finance. So in my experience, a woman that's going into an office wears a suit, you know. And my first jobs were similar to that. So my first job out of college, or even when I was still in high school, my mother got me I guess you would call it an internship across the street from where she worked at a law office. So again, I had to dress a
Yeah.
certain way. And then I went to work out of college, and it was at a pharmaceutical company. And I worked in first the sales and marketing department, and then I worked in the legal department. So I had to dress a certain way, or at
Yes.
least that's what I thought, you know.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
then my first professional job as a recruiter, I worked in an agency, and we actually had a dress code. So women had to be dressed a certain way with stockings, heels. And, we did our little things, we sexually harassed ourselves where, I know women that said things like negotiation bra. If they were going to a client meeting, depending on who it was, their sex came up a little higher. So yeah, we did those things to ourselves. I was, not just that, but then my hair, I felt like my hair had to be straight or curled, and like I was getting sets all the time. So I would go get my hair set every Saturday
Yeah.
and just wear my hair in curls so it just hang. Rarely wore ponytails, like rarely. And I don't mean just like pulling my hair back. I mean like even a bun. Like that was like the best I could do was like a bun. Was like that was still professional because there was
Yeah.
no hair on your neck, and I worked in defense and intel environment, and a lot of the women did, they were told to keep their hair off of their neck. So that was another situation too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
But
interesting.
I brought a lot of stuff with me. And it wasn't until about 2004 that people started to challenge that, because that was the first time I was in a really like, and I don't want to say diverse environment because I'm always, in a diverse environment. But
Yeah.
I guess because it was more people, working for for now a global, but a large global company,
Yeah.
you got everything. So people dressed how they dressed, and they had moved to like the business casual type of feel. And I remember when my first day working there, like I still had a briefcase. I was like,
You're kidding me.
I have a
Oh my
friend. I
gosh.
have a friend who calls me the Black Ally McBeal. Like I had a briefcase, and I came in, like I said, in a suit because it was my first day of work.
Yeah.
So how most people only dress for an interview, like that's how I dressed every single day. With the exception of like I wear pantsuits, or if I didn't have an interview, I might tone it down a bit.
Yeah.
Not get fully dressed, I should say. But yeah, someone said, like, I overheard one of the older women um, who had worked, in another part of the country, like had worked in another part of the world. She was,
Mhm.
from Europe, and she grew up there, and she had different standards than I did, because
Yeah.
she had her hair dyed of, what people would call a funky color. She wore edgy, like trendy clothes.
Yeah.
Um, so when she saw me, she was like, "Who does she think she is?" Like she said that something like that, and I was like,
Do you think that's I mean that's interesting just listening to
mm-hmm.
just coming from your family background, that
Yeah,
environment that you grew up in, and during that time what your parents had to do in terms of when they're presenting themselves to be able to be taken seriously, and then of course you adopted that same narrative because that's the environment that
mm-hmm.
you grew up in, and and as we know, environment shaped a lot about us. But then you go into this space now, and then there's this shift where two different dynamics in terms of personality, you coming from straight lace, I'm gonna call it that way, and then here's this other person who has a little bit more flair and more add a little bit more personality, and then they're looking at you going, oh, who do you think you are, right? How do you, in that sense, how did you navigate that particular scenario? Because for some women, especially the women that I've worked with, is coming from that background where you're told, you know straighten your hair, wear the black and white suit. This is the way you're going to succeed. This is the way you're going to be taken seriously. And they're in that space where they're like, I really want to bring my personality, but they're afraid that someone may judge them and say,
Yeah.
oh, who do you think you are? Why do you want to go against the dress code? Like, what was that experience? What was that experience like for you? And how did you navigate that
I wasn't.
difference?
I didn't take it like I didn't like shrink
Mhm.
from that, because again, the other Black women who were there
Yeah.
provided a sense of security because they looked the same way I did.
Okay.
Like they might have been a little bit older, or even the same age, but they also had those ideas passed down to them that, we always say Black people in America have to work 2 times as hard to get half as much, but we also are carrying this burden that we have to look twice as good to be taken seriously. So because they dressed like that, I didn't feel out, it's like I didn't feel othered. I didn't feel out of place because the people that I was, that were coming to me and, taking me under their wing and all of that, like they look like that. And especially me being in a male dominated environment, like the programs that I supported were like at the Pentagon and, 3-letter agencies. And those folks wore suits, like the men wore suits. So I fit in for what I was doing.
Okay. And I want to touch on that a little bit, because if we look at, just women entering the workforce and what we should, the uniform that we were given to be taken seriously, it was this idea that we needed to mirror the men, right?
Yeah.
In some industries, in some fields, like women were told to only wear dresses or skirts. And in some cases, like, but whatever you wore needed to closely mirror the men, which you'll find like in finance or in law, that women are still wearing that navy blue because that's what men were wearing in the workplace. And there's this idea that you have to dress that way to be taken seriously. Now, what I want to know from you, with 20 years going through your career and basically showing up the way that at that time was the way that you needed to show up to be taken seriously as a Black woman, how have your style changed? And do you think that maybe the way that we were showing up before, that and coming today, that some of that narrative we need to shed, and maybe some of that narrative is what has kept us from really creating, like being more bold in the opportunities that we're seeking?
I want to say yes, but I don't want to tell people that they can do whatever they want, because the reality is that you really can't.
Yeah.
You're just going to be judged differently. And like, no matter what, I take, I would say this, like we had, a collective of the younger young ladies that we would talk to and that we would mentor, but like, I guess they would be considered millennials, but like they're younger millennials, because some of these young ladies were like just out of college, like 21, 22, 23. And they grew up they grew up with Facebook, they grew up with things. So like they had a different mindset, and, some of that we adopted. But, I remember there have been instances where people have been, and it's only been like, I've only seen it with one with one white person, where they called them like something that they wore, a young lady wore a pair of white shoes to her interview, and the other people who were going to be her peers, and we ended up hiring the person too, like they judged her, like, oh my God, she had on white shoes. And we're like, what? Like these are the types of things that we to deal with. Or the Black girls or the Hispanic girls who had more curvy bodies.
Yeah.
They could wear a sweater and leggings, the same exact outfit as someone who is maybe straight up and down.
Yeah.
And they would be, somebody would say, can you talk to them about their outfit? It's distracting.
Yeah. And it's sad. It's sad because we are perceiving certain bodies and certain people from certain cultures as not professional, right? Like,
yes,
how they look is not professional. Now, something that you said is, and I think this is sometimes what happens in the work environment, and what I've noticed is this idea that if you are to express yourself through your style, it's going to be like this wild, wild west where everybody's going to be coming into the office wearing whatever and showing up, however they please. But I mean, from my perspective, we understand that the narrative that we were fed is not necessarily in our benefit, right? It's not to say, it wasn't in our interest. It's to put us in this box as to an idea. And I heard this phrase on a podcast that I was listening to. It's bring your authentic self or be yourself, but the
Mhm.
self that I want you to be. Right.
Mm.
And I think the narrative seeps into that when we say, bring yourself, but this is how I want you to come into that space from your professional background. And not to say, no, we're not creating a wild, wild west environment, but do you see a benefit where individuals are able to come into that workplace? Obviously, it's up to that establishment to say, okay, we have a business professional or business casual dress code. No
Right.
leggings, no hats, no baseball caps, no t-shirts, no. But do you see a benefit as an individual stepping into the space knowing that you can bring yourself, including how you express yourself?
I do, because I promise you, like there are women that I have looked at and I'm like, wow, like yeah, he's like nice, like, and I love the way that they express to themselves through their style, wide range of ages. And it's not that they did anything, out of the ordinary. Like I said, it's not necessarily having a what they call non-natural color hair. I don't necessarily want to use those words, but
Yeah.
have a purple hair, because I
Yeah.
have seen people with purple hair or something like that and come into the workforce. Like, I don't think that that's a big deal, but I do think that when it becomes the topic of conversation and it becomes I feel like it shouldn't be a distraction. Um,
Mm.
it shouldn't overtake. I mean, the first time you see me, like the first time I went to work with my hair cut, people were like, "Oh well," like, but okay, it didn't stop us from doing work. But if I fell and split my pants and didn't know, or I walked around all day, people are like all day long, like, your behind is out, crazy, or why is your chest showing today, dear? Like, put that away. Like, when it becomes a distraction, I think that it can be an issue. But I don't think that style in and of itself is a distraction if you feel comfortable in it. Like, I developed a uniform for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was always late. And like, I'm one of those people, and my father told me this even from when I was a little girl. Like, you have too many choices. That's why you can't decide,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do, like, have too many choices. So it would become, like I said, a distraction of what am I going to put on. So
Yes.
I was like, I remember one summer and it worked, and then I carried that to the next summer. Next summer, I was like, I'm only wearing dresses, because guess what? That's one piece. I just pull it on and keep it moving. Or my everybody knows I love a cardigan. So just throw on a basic shirt and a cardigan over it, or put on a dress, a steel sleeve dress, throw a cardigan over it, and just keep it moving. So I developed, a particular style. No, women that only wear black,
Yeah.
and they have a lot of different black pieces. But again, that's their uniform. It keeps them on
Yeah.
task, and not worrying about it. My main thing is, like I said, I just want to be comfortable. So when I was working at, all of these hours, and, maybe having to walk from building to building,
Mhm.
or sitting in a chair all day, like, I don't need to have on heels that are this. I'm just going to be sitting in this chair anyway. Like, am I going to get on the runway later and walk down the hall so everybody can see these shoes? No, probably not. So get over
Yeah.
it.
And that's it, right? The appropriateness, and of course your comfort level.
Yes.
Now, there's I the idea behind a distraction. I think what happens, like even from looking at the clients that I've worked with and hearing the conversation, is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this style story conversation, to hear some of the stories that women like yourself may have been told and are holding and shape the way that you show up in your profession and in your brand. And I
Mhm.
think the idea sometimes for us as women, and especially as Black women, it's we don't want to be a distraction. It's like people, we're being told, don't be a distraction at work. But if we
Yeah.
think about it, anything that, anytime we come out of the box that we were put into and the
Mm.
expectation as to how we should show up, that's a distraction. Because people are, it's not a distraction as in work will get done. It's that people are now recognizing that you're no longer in that box of how they think that you, based on their expectation. We think about women showing up with their natural hair, and everybody's like, oh, wow, you have a different hairstyle today. But I truly believe when we decide how we want to show up, yes, you have to be appropriate for the environment. I always say you can't wear bikini to the boardroom, right? So when we think about your clothing and the environment that you're in,
You'd be surprised.
well, I will hope, listen to me, I will hope not, right? I will hope not. And that's what I mean by when you have to think about the appropriateness for it. But expressing yourself and embracing your identity and your culture in what you wear, knowing that you know that once you do that, there's going to be a conversation around it. And I think the idea behind we need to fit into this box and narrative is sometimes what keeps a lot of women from taking up space, from advocating for themselves, for using their voices, because they're shrinking to fit into this idea. Like I love this quote by Carolina Wanga, which says, who you are is non-negotiable. If you can't be who you are, where you are, don't change who you are, change where you are,
Yeah.
right? So you have to decide for yourself what your comfort level is in terms of how you show up for yourself, but knowing that you're not shrinking, deciding that you're going to wear flats instead of heels, that's a personal comfort. But
Mhm.
deciding you're going to straighten your hair as opposed to wearing your natural hair, which feels good for you, it's part of who you are, to fit into something, that's where I'm like, no, let's not do that, right? Let's not do
Yeah.
that. What are your thoughts on that? Like in
No,
terms,
I've been, I mean, even since we talked, what was it, 2 weeks ago now? Like I've been thinking a lot about it, and I don't know if you remember, because it was probably because it was meaningful. It was so meaningful to me, and it was like a bell went off for me when I said that I had Black women that said for me like take your hair, like you look childish with a ponytail. And I wondered, I was like, were they protecting me or
yeah,
were they actually judging me? And I was like, I think they were protecting me. Or like when I've gotten like, okay, don't wear this or don't say that or don't show up like this. But I also have to remember that sometimes it is uncomfortable for me to do certain things or to make choices. Like I have gone to speak in front of an audience um, with my hair wet, and I would never do that
yeah,
before.
yeah,
I would have made a hair appointment. But then there are days that I was like, you're going to do this. Like, you're not going to do this. But then I made an appointment at Dry Bar for 7 o'clock in the morning and then went to my appointment because, like, some days I just can't do it. Other days it's like, you know what? It's okay
yeah,
to show up this way. But I'm also a person of a certain age. So and you said that there's no such thing as work clothes, play clothes. There's just clothes. But I came out of an environment that said you had work clothes, church clothes, play clothes,
oh no, oh no,
party clothes, baby, party clothes. Like, those outfits that we used to go get from 579 and
yeah, the
merry-go-round.
same here, the same here. Like you couldn't wear your church clothes to go to a function. Like no, and
No.
you had specific piles
Yes.
of clothing. I mean, I still do that in a sense that, because again, we're going back to appropriateness, right?
Yes.
My bodycon dress is not going to be appropriate for me to go to.
Why not? Throw a blazer over it, honey, and keep it moving.
But for me, this is the
Oh,
thing, right?
gotcha.
And this is where I say it comes down as well to your personal style, your
Yeah.
comfort level, and the environment that you're going into and the message that you want to say.
Yes.
I wouldn't feel, because when I'm in a bodycon type dress, the
Uh-huh.
mindset that I'm in, I'm ready to party. Okay. That's not my
Well,
work mode.
okay.
If I'm going into speaking and working, it's a different feel
Yeah.
that I want to have, and my clothing helps me to bring out that feeling more, right? So that's how I navigate my wardrobe and how I show up.
Okay.
But I want to go back to a little bit of what you said there with when you were told about your hair and told about wearing this, where it's like, are they protecting? Are they judging? And given where we're coming from as Black women and women of color, and how we were told, like, go to work, put your head down, just go along with the game so that we can get ahead. It was such a big deal when you got into corporate and you got a good job. It's like, yes. And especially if you were the first person in your family, it's like, yes, you did it. And when we think about the stories that they hold, some of the trauma that they hold, the internal biases that they have themselves, how do we decide when we're giving advice and when we're receiving advice, whether or not we are giving it from a place of where we're really and truly, yes, what you're wearing, your boobs are flashing, it's out, like, or it's, we're not accustomed, I didn't come from that, and that place or environment where women wore red to work.
No,
Just
because red is a grown lady color. So like, as my
how do you
autistic
balance
daughter would
that?
say. So I've had this situation, and sometimes it's a matter of us using words that don't mean the same thing to other people.
Yeah.
So two very quick stories. I was supporting a contract at the Pentagon, and we were looking for administrative assistants. And this customer, the government customer, we were told they were very, very strict, very straight laced, like former military. They wanted women to look this way, this way, this way. So I was like, when you come to the interview, make sure that you and they said dress your best. So
A
I
trap.
relayed that information. Right. And this person put on a semi-formal and back that like bubble dress. You remember the dresses that had like like, and it was with a lace overlay because that was their best thing. And I had to pull them to the side, and not in like a, like a, oh my God, what are you doing? Go home. Like, you went to the interview, and got the job. But I was like, hey, do you, how are you feeling? This, and this. And whatever I said, got them to, like I said, like sometimes just putting a black blazer over something, made a difference.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And they got the job. And I had to explain that, oh, no, not that fancy. Like, it's not that kind of fancy place. It's just, they want someone that wears, that looks like this kind of thing. But it's fine. It is what it is. But to say that they want to wear the best. And then there was another person who, again, they had a very curvy body.
Yeah.
Just like, and I'm just going to say it because this is badge on. This is a safe space. There was a badge on. Like, and they didn't, and I guess that they didn't have a lot of what we would call work clothes. And I was tired of hearing people talk about it. And no one was brave enough to have that conversation, because number one, that's not a conversation that you have. But what I said, listen, I'm about to give away like all of these things. I was like, some of them still have the tags on them. I was like, if you want to come down to my car, I was like, and take a look. I was like, before I give them away, I'm just giving you first right of refusal.
Yeah.
And that person, to this day, like years later, I still keep in touch with them. And I had them come and like do one of my resume workshops, like be one of the reviewers.
Yeah.
And they're like, Keirsten, look, I have on the such and such. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So, like, it's the way that you do it without making that person feel bad. And like I said, it wasn't that they didn't know. It wasn't that they didn't know any better. It wasn't that they were doing it. Like, they just, like, that wasn't a thought.
That's what they had, right? And this is why I think the conversation around appearance and personal style should happen. And we also need to, and come from it from the lens of removing your own bias, right?
Yeah.
It's not how you think a person should show up, but being very clear and saying, I remember working at this wealth management company, and the first time I heard smart casual, I was like, what is smart casual? what is that? Yeah. And I feel like companies need to be absolutely clear on these definitions. Don't just leave it up to people to figure out what is business casual. Like, clearly define it by giving examples as well as to what that looks like. If you're going to say wear your best dress. Define what that looks like for your
Yes.
company, for your establishment, as to how you want to show up. And the second
Yeah.
thing I wanted to touch on what you did, it's I'm a firm believer in, don't talk about someone behind their back.
No.
Yes, conversations are going to be uncomfortable, but I prefer you to have a conversation with me than to talk about me behind my back. And going on what you said, I had a supervisor that did that for me. It wasn't that I was dressed inappropriately. I was working in banking, was my
Yeah.
first corporate job. I was a teller and I didn't have any money. So I bought
Yeah.
the limited money that I had. I bought two suits. One was a black, they were both basically the same. One was
Yeah.
black with white stripes, a pinstripe, and one was white with black stripes.
Okay.
But I wore the black and white more because I didn't like how I look in the white one. I was like,
Okay.
oh, no, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to be showing things. So that
Yeah.
one just, so here's it. I was going to work every single day wearing this black and white.
Yeah.
Eventually, it took a toll.
Yeah.
And my supervisor came to me and she's like, you have so much potential, so much room for growth. However, your presentation of yourself is not showing your potential.
Yeah.
And she's like, I just went to this store. I set up. It was called Colors of Benetton, or Benetton of Colors. One of
Yeah.
the two.
United Colors of Benetton.
United Colors of Benetton.
Yes.
Yes, and that's where she would shop her clothing, and she set up a small account for me to go in
That's
and
so nice.
select some pieces. And I cannot tell you how grateful I was to her for that, because it also brought to my attention that the way I presented myself had a tremendous impact on how I wanted to feel about myself, but also how others perceived me. And I was in control of how I wanted people to perceive me.
Yeah.
So I like that you did that. And I'm hoping that from these conversations, just the work that I do as well, that more persons will be conscious of that. Don't judge someone because they don't fit into the narrative that you want them to, but
Right.
looking at how can you assist that person in presenting themselves in a way that truly reflects who they are as an individual. And I love that. Before we close out the conversation, we were talking a little bit backstage where you're like, I am tired of getting dressed. I'm tired of this whole trying to figure out what to wear. So I just put on the black.
Yeah.
I know for most of the clients that I've worked with, the reason why they opt for that black, it's not a matter of reducing the decisions, but it's a matter of hiding who they are, right? It's
Oh.
feeling insecure, feeling self-conscious, not feeling as though they can be themselves in the room, right? So they grab that black as a way of hiding and shrinking. But you shared an interesting perspective as to, okay, I'm using this black, but here's how I add my personality. I'd love for you to share that a little bit more.
Yeah, I could have put on a color today. I even had like a bright yellow shirt on, but then I was like, "You look like Big Bird." I was like, and they're only going to see. And we'll see. If I was going to be seen in person, I probably would have went with that because you would have seen the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I have to be very conscious of that. I am in a box when
Yeah.
I'm on camera. So yeah, I'll just put on a statement piece over a black shirt. And again, when we're on camera, things can get distracting because we want people to pay attention to us and not, the cat walking across the screen or the dog barking in the background or, the mess that I, might have, behind me that I didn't move out of the frame.
Yeah.
So yeah, like when I'm on camera, I think I am much more, I'm conservative anyway. So let's just put that out there. I'm a very conservative person. Like I just started wearing red lipstick a few years ago. That's only because someone told me to. They said, listen, you can look a mess. And if you put on some red lipstick, you were going to look halfway not a mess. And I said, okay. And I tried it. I said, you know what? You're right. So if you ever see me with red lips, it's because I look a mess.
Oh, no. And that's okay, right? And that's okay. Navigating the stories that we hold is part of the story is based on the environment that we grew up in. You just said, yes, I'm
Yeah.
conservative. And that comes from your environment and your background that you know, and that's okay. But you've also, what I've noticed from my own observation, and you've pointed out a little bit, it's like, yes, I'm conservative, but I've learned to add some of my
Yeah, I like
personality
jewelry.
in a
Yeah.
statement necklace. And that for me, it's where I'm, I would love for women to get to. Like, you don't have to break out of, if that's who you are, part of your personality, that's totally fine. But how can you show up more as yourself, right?
Hmm.
How can you create, it's not distractions, it's more conversation. Because think about if we were 30 of us on screen and you just showed up in the black, it's like, but then you showed up in the net with the black with the necklace, it's like, oh, who's that person? It creates a conversation as a way to connect with you. So I
Hmm.
love that you bring your personality to your style.
Thank you.
As we're closing out, is there one thing that you want to leave with the audience in terms of how do they bring their personal style into the professional environment by being themselves, kind of removing some of the stories that they may have been told that's causing
Mm.
them to shrink and show up more as themselves?
Yeah, like don't. I think that a lot of times when we are, like you said, not being authentic and when we're shrinking ourselves, like that's actually more, like that's a sign of us being uncomfortable. Like we're doing something to please someone else. So my advice is when you're starting to feel like you have to appease someone, do that for yourself. Like, what's going to make me feel good? Because I promise you, no matter, like, thinking that you look good or looking at yourself and being like, yeah,
Yeah, I love
yeah, like that helps you feel better.
that.
Looking better a lot of times can help you feel better, give you a little bit more confidence. And if you're not comfortable, like in a suit jacket and some stuff, like, and you're all hemmed up in there, like, please don't do that. Yes, you're all tight in there, like, no,
Yeah,
take
I love
take that off. Take that off.
I love that. And that's it. Wear clothes that's comfortable for you, appropriate for the
Yeah.
environment, and sends the message that you want to send. I think it's important for us to look at the style stories that we're holding, the internal biases, external biases, and stories that we're holding that's stopping us from showing up as our best selves, and start shedding some of that and really showing up as who we are and not a version of what we think the world wants us to be. I think there's a lot more freedom in being yourself. And so I want to say thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. I really appreciate and really enjoy having this, this conversation with you. I hope everyone, whether or not you're here live with us, that you enjoyed as well. And if you're watching the replay, thank you very much for coming back and watching the replay. If we haven't connected as yet, click that connect button here on LinkedIn. And of course, you can find Keirsten here on LinkedIn as well. She's on Twitter. I think you're on.
LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
Yes, awesome, awesome. So thank you all very much for joining. And remember that representation is not just you being in the room or having a seat at the table, but it's also how you show up. Thank you for being here. Have a great day, guys. Bye.